Hello everyone, this is Red Vitus, and welcome to my channel. This is going to be the third and final video of the restoration of an Elgin 1880s pocket watch. This is a little bit unconventional in that this is an assembly video, but it begins with the watch near completely assembled. And I'm starting out showing you this because, well, the watch wouldn't run. That was especially disconcerting because the watch was in running condition before I started working on it. So why did this happen? Well, I knew it wasn't the balance. The balance was running freely, had great motion when it was installed in the watch without an escapement. The gear train was all in good condition. I know because I tested each one of the wheels individually, and again with the movement assembled, checking that the pallet fork moved back and forth smoothly. So the question I was trying to answer was, why was the watch not running? And had I done something to the watch to lead to it not running? My suspicion was that somehow the escapement was fouling the balance. Remember, I had replaced a worn-out lower cap jewel, and potentially that had moved the balance vertically and put it closer into contact with the escapement. Did the repair have an unintended consequence? Well, maybe, but I think that the reason it did will surprise you. And indeed, when I took a photo, it clearly showed that the roller plate was in contact with the pallet fork, which really shouldn't happen just from a cap jewel replacement. I also noticed, looking at the balance staff, that the pivots were worn out pretty badly. This could be addressed by burnishing the pivots, but that wouldn't solve the problem. The actual cause of this problem is kind of surprising. I think that this watch actually has an incorrect balance staff. How could that be the case? Well, this model pocket watch uses the Elgin 857 staff, and that staff comes in 2 different lengths and 2 different hub sizes for a total of 4 different styles of that balance. Now this watch, the current staff in this watch had a long hub, and I believe because it had a long hub that the roller plate was too close to the pallet fork to begin with. And knowing that, the way to repair the problem would be to replace the current balance staff with a short hub one. That was my hope anyway. Now, I couldn't foresee any other problems that it might create by replacing it with a short hub, but that was the only answer that I had that would address the root cause of the problem. And next, I'm going to show you how I replaced the balance staff. However, I didn't film the removal of the hairspring and the roller plate, but I am going to provide a link to a video on my channel where I show that on a different watch. The removal of the balance staff takes place on a staking set, and my KD set comes with a balance remover. It's an object that looks a little bit like a pipe, and it has stakes that come with the set that fit over the balance staff for punching it out. So you see I have the balance placed under the part, and now here there's a little window where we can see, it's a little fuzzy, but you can see the staff being hammered out. Now that removes the staff, and it just drops out the bottom, and that leaves you with a balance which is ready for restaffing. Here's a look at the hole in the balance arms. That's where the new staff will fit. Now with the same staking set, I place the new staff into a smaller hole, and on top of that I place the balance. First I seat the balance on top of the hub with my tweezers. And next, with hand pressure only, I press a flat hollow punch onto the balance, and this is to ensure that it's fully seated. Now I begin to form the rivet. This is a round hollow punch, and with successive light taps, it begins to bend the metal on the staff and form a rivet. After a few taps, I lift the stake, rotate it a little bit, and continue hammering. I repeat this process until the balance is firmly connected to the staff. To complete forming the rivet, I use a different flat hollow punch, and that bends the rivet over and forms a secure connection on the balance staff. Again, with a few light taps, lifting and rotating the stake, and continue hammering. Now I'm installing the roller plate. This is a single roller, and I have a stake that nicely fits over the roller plate with a notch in it to protect the jewel. So first I press it down with hand pressure as far as it will go, and then with light taps only, move it into position on top of the hub. Next, I reinstall the hairspring, paying attention to place the hairspring in the same orientation relative to the balance that it was in before it was removed. And again, I use a flat hollow punch, this time with hand pressure only, pushing it down on top of the balance. And now I have a restaffed balance staff. So I'll resume or reassemble the watch. This first part I'm installing is the set lever. So a little bit of heavy oil on that post. And its blued screw, which allows the lever to rotate back and forth, but prevents it from falling out. Now I assemble the gear train. I have the top plate here, and I'm putting each of the 5 gears into position. This is referred to as the upside down method, since the one would normally place the gears on the pillar plate. That was the pallet fork. And this is the escape wheel. The 4th wheel goes next. Then the center wheel. And lastly, the 3rd wheel. Next, I position the pillar plate on top of the gears, fitting each one of the pivots into its respective hole. And that was quick. So the next step is to carefully flip the movement over, and I place the movement into a movement holder to attach the screws. And that ensures that nothing will fall out. Recall there are 3 screws holding this top plate down. I only partially tighten these screws. I want to ensure that the gear train is free so that I know that all the pivots are in the correct position before I tighten it down fully. This third screw is a little bit different from the other 2. It sits flush with the top plate. Now I'm putting tension on the center wheel and verifying that that pallet fork swings in both directions. Now that I know that the gears are all in position, I tighten down the plate. This is the click spring. And click spring screw. Aligning this screw with the threaded hole takes a little bit of patience. Now I'm oiling the click post. And there's the click, which slides on top. And there's no screw to hold down the click. This is the ratchet wheel. And this is the winding, or the stem and winding wheel. The stem fits into the hole in the winding wheel. I'm using a heavy oil here. I could also use a grease. Now I'm reinserting the mainspring into the barrel. This is my winder. So attaching the winding arbor to the spring and winding it into the barrel, leaving a little bit of the bridle hanging out so that I can align the pins of the bridle with the hole in the barrel. And here you can see that the mainspring is in the barrel. I have a little practice at doing this. And this is the barrel arbor, or the mainspring arbor. I've oiled that arbor and the spring already, so I'm just closing up the top of that mainspring, and I'm oiling for the bottom arbor. And once that's in the movement, I place a little bit more oil on the top of the arbor. And then position the barrel bridge. This has a couple of screws. These are different and easily distinguished from the screws of the other plate. Next, I turn my attention to the keyless works, and recall this is a pendant set watch. I'm oiling this large post for the winding wheel. That winding wheel engages with the crown wheel. This odd-looking spring it has to go in now because it sits underneath an intermediate gear. And there's a small blued screw which holds it into place, which I was able to fit and screw in without too much trouble. This is the underside of the yoke, and there's an intermediate winding gear that fits on top of that post. The oil lubricates the gear, but it also gives a little bit of adhesion so that when I flip over that yoke to install it, the gear remains in place. There you can see that operation. Now I position the washer on top of the yoke. And the yoke screw here is left-handed. With the screwdriver, I rotate counterclockwise to tighten the yoke screw. This is the minute wheel post. And I carefully oil the post without getting any oil on the plate. Now I oil this post for the intermediate setting gear, which fits on top of that spring. The spring tends to push this gear out of position, but I managed to get it on. I think it might have been easier if I had loosened the screw on that spring a little bit and then retightened it at the end, but it worked out. Now this plate fits over that gear, and it also, on the bottom, it has a post which engages with the setting lever. Now here's the yoke spring. Attaching these is tricky. As I'm tightening the screw, I'm also moving the spring into position and completing tightening that screw. The last piece that goes on is the set lever spring. There was some rust on that spring, which I've removed, and that leaves that part a little bit more polished than the other parts. However, that's only a cosmetic issue, which you really won't see because the dial will cover this entire assembly. Okay, here I'm oiling the pivots. I place a light oil on this third wheel. Now that's the fourth wheel. And again, a little bit of oil on the escape wheel. I also place a very tiny amount of oil on the pallet fork, although it's not filmed. That's because it's a metal bushing. And I use a heavier oil on the third and center wheels. Here I'm repeating the process on the top plate, except I don't put any oil on the pallet fork since it has a ruby jewel. So we're back to where we started in a way. I'm going to place this balance staff on the watch, and it better tick. Notice how I hold the balance cock steady and rotate the watch, as opposed to the other way around. And it looks good. So I'll install this balance cock screw. And what a relief. This next part that goes on is the cannon pinion. So I oil the center wheel post, pop it into place with a sturdy set of steel tweezers. And here is the hour wheel with dial washer. Next, I install the dial, carefully aligning the dial feet. This is the hour hand, which I press down, maintaining that hand parallel with the dial. And the minute hand. And lastly, the second hand. It looks like we have a running watch. I test that the time sets, and it does. Now on the time grapher, I see a good amplitude improvement from where we started, but a lot of work to get there. This is a completed watch. I must say, I didn't anticipate it being this much work. Having replaced a jewel into a setting, closed up some brass bushings, and restaffed a watch. It's a lot more than I bargained for. But this is a really beautiful watch. It's a classic, really. So this is an Elgin grade 74, all complete, with a nearly perfect dial and a strong beat. It's keeping good time. I've been running it for several days now, and I'm happy to say that this project is complete. So this is Red Vitus. I'd like to thank you all again for visiting my channel, and I hope to see you again.